This is Michael Popak, so it must be Legal AF After Dark. The New York Appellate Court once again has rejected Donald Trump's appeal, his attempt to get the gag order removed at the appellate level, having found no constitutional issue involved whatsoever, as Judge Merchan, the trial judge, considers whether to remove the gag order in time for the presidential debate in a few days between President Joe Biden and former whatever he was, Donald Trump. What will Judge Merchan do now that the appellate court has basically told him the gag order was fine? We cover it all. We analyze it all on Legal AF. Take a listen. Let me kick it off with a question. Do you think that Merchan, where the issue does sit, it's not with the appeals court as we will talk about, it's with Merchan. Do you think he should or will lift the gag order in advance of the debate, or does the upcoming debate only strengthen his hand to keep the gag order in place since the debate happens before the sentencing?
I mean, I don't see any reason to ever lift the gag order with respect to the jurors. There's no reason for him to ever be able to comment on the jurors who sat for this case. It could impact other people's willingness to sit for jury service. He's somebody who has a long history of calling for violence, etc. And it's just really crazy that anyone would ever consider that a right or a First Amendment right to put jurors in jeopardy. You know, as Donald Trump famously said in the Caitlin Collins town hall on CNN, my followers listen to me like no one else. And if he starts doing things to the jurors, you got another Shea Moss, Ruby Freeman situation where people's lives are ruined just for volunteering and doing their civic duty. So I don't think that will ever happen with the jurors, nor should it. Like I said, there's no reason to ever talk about them. And I think it's actually fascinating that we've not heard, they haven't come forward. They've maintained their anonymity. I applaud them for that. I think it's smart. And nothing is leaked. Nobody has figured it out. Nobody has said anything. And so therefore they have really kind of dodged a bullet, literally and figuratively. So I don't see that part of the gag order ever being lifted. I would say the same thing about the family members of the prosecutors, and the court staff. There's no reason to ever go after family members either, or the various people who are civil servants and who are doing their jobs. The gag order doesn't prevent Donald Trump from speaking out against Alvin Bragg or Judge Merchan. And so he can do and criticize and talk about the case all he wants. The one area that I think the judge might modify it has to do with some of the witnesses. Now, I don't know that he will. I don't know that he will lift it as to all witnesses because, again, it just impacts the ability, like future people who might become witnesses. If you know that you'll be protected for a little while, but not forever, it could really chill witnesses from wanting to come forward. So, however, I could see a carve out that has to do with people like Michael Cohen, who, although I don't think he should be threatened, and I think the power that Donald Trump has compared to any power, which he has none, Michael Cohen has, even the audience that each of them have is just not comparable. You know, Donald Trump is much, the power dynamic is he's much more powerful, obviously. That being said, Michael Cohen speaks publicly about Donald Trump. And so I can imagine a scenario where the judge would say, you can respond to that. Stormy Daniels has remained quiet. But if she were to change that, maybe he would change that. I don't know. I could see that that's the area that I could see the judge potentially making some exceptions, but the rest, I don't see him lifting it. There's no reason to. There's no reason to ever have to talk about those individuals and to put their lives in danger. So that's kind of where I think where the judge will land on the gag order. But, the Court of Appeals just basically the gag order was in place, right? And that Judge Mershon imposed. Then they appealed it to the middle level court, which is called the Appellate Division here in New York. They kept the gag order in place. Then Donald Trump went to the New York's highest court, the Court of Appeals, and they just denied it on Tuesday. They just said, basically there's no constitutional question directly involved. And so, it's just a couple of lines here. Appeal dismissed without cost by the court sua sponte, which means on their own, upon the ground that no substantial constitutional question is directly involved. And that's from Chief Judge Wilson. Judge Halligan took no part. Judge Halligan is Caitlin Halligan, who used to work in the Manhattan DA's office, and I used to work with her. She was the general counsel there, so that's why she took no part and recused herself, since this is a Manhattan DA case. So essentially, they basically said there's no constitutional issue, which is interesting because he's constantly saying First Amendment, First Amendment, First Amendment, right? The gag order prevents me, First Amendment. And they just dismissed it outright, saying, sorry, Constitution's not implicated. There's no constitutional question here. So it's just another example of him saying what he thinks something is, but courts saying it's not true, and of course he continues it. So that's where I see the gag order.
Yeah, I agree with you. He still has an opportunity with the appellate court. There's another 30-day application that he can make. They seem to have no interest whatsoever at the Court of Appeals level, having lost already at the intermediary appellate court of the First Department Appellate Division, which sits in Manhattan. Now he's a two-time loser at the appellate level. He almost always loses at the appellate level in almost all of his cases, except when you and I will talk about the Supreme Court at the appropriate time, when we finally get decisions related to Donald Trump, which will either be this week or, roll into July, meaning roll into never interference case before the election. On the gag order, I agree with you. I think you just leave it in place. I think the debate that's coming up is the reason to keep the gag order in place, because it'll just give him a megaphone of unlimited wattage for 50, 80 million people, for him to go after and put crosshairs on the back of people that are just doing their civic duty and are civil servants and are part of our criminal justice system, and they're just doing their job.
Do you think he's going to show up to the debate?
Yeah. I mean, they work so hard to challenge Biden, and then anytime, any place. And so so they pick the time and a place, and I don't want to do it with the presidential debate committee. And I don't want to, and they're okay, we won't do it with them. I mean, he's been accommodated in every way. I think it would be a terrible political misstep for Trump not to now debate Biden. I think it's all in favor. The wind is totally at the sail of Joe Biden, as far as I'm concerned. What have you heard, or what do you think on that?
I mean, I've heard nothing. He just seems to be looking for excuses to get out of it, right? He's constantly finding obstacles, drug testing and whatever, all these obstacles.
You think the gag order could be? You mean he would say then, "Oh, I'm subject to a gag order.
Exactly.
I would love to tell you everything, but I'm being gagged."
That's what my first initial thought was, but who knows?
That's not bad.
I don't think like him.
That. That's I'll have to marinate on that
chicken.
One. Well, that we know. I said marinate, you said chicken. See, that's why you and I get along so well. Plus, I'm hungry. I'm down a meal every day since the clock has started. Yeah. So we got good on that. Then the sentencing, we're waiting on two filings. We're waiting on your old office. I'm sorry, Trump to go first. We're waiting on Trump to file. I think it's later this week, could be early next week. Their recommendations for sentencing, which we know is going to be no sentence. They're just going to be a political campaign screed masquerading as a sentencing memo. We'll get that. And then I think it's June 27th. For some reason that's a date in my head. Alvin Bragg and his team there is going to be submitting their pre-sentencing memo, and then there's the pre-sentencing report, which we're hoping to get our hands on if it's made public, and we'll be able to talk about that with the interview and the dossier and all the background research and all their recommendations from the probation department, and then all these inputs go in and get plugged into Judge Mershon, who frankly makes the final decision. He's always had Donald Trump's justice in his hands. I was being kind there. And we'll see what he's going to do. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't bash and attack the person who my liberty is dependent upon. But, Donald Trump does a lot of weird, demented things that make him unstable and for the presidency. And so that's what we've continued to watch. Before we go ahead, sorry.
No, just in addition to the sentencing memos, sure. So a couple of things. There might be some pretrial motions that or I should say post-trial motions that they file. So that you will also see that. And then the prosecutor would respond to that as well. So who knows if they're going to make any crazy motions post-trial, but I wouldn't be surprised if they try to do that and say things like there wasn't enough evidence, or who knows, whatever they'll say.
Well, it'll be their appellate brief. I agree with you. It'll be their appellate brief.
Yeah.
And
then the other.
No, go ahead.
No, it's just the other thing I was going to say is the probation report is not public. I know, but so it's not something you usually get to see. So unless somebody somehow gets a hold of it, it's not something that we can necessarily count on seeing. But it'll certainly be referred to at the sentencing. And in particular, what I think it'll be, I think you're going to see, unless he's changed his tune, that he shows no remorse, he takes no responsibility, and denies that.
Won't it be in the briefing though, Karen? I mean, they can refer to the.
They can refer to it, yes.
Right. So we'll get a glimmer. We can patch it together from the pieces that are referenced in each other's sentencing memos.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that makes me feel better. I was thinking, I was kind of scratching out some notes here. I think it is totally appropriate that on Juneteenth, we recognize that 3, and if you add Judge Chutkan in there, 4 of the major figures that are responsible for bringing Donald Trump to justice are Black or African American. I know that's something that Donald Trump has recognized because he has found ways to be out and out racist in his comments about all of them, whether it's calling Fani Willis Fanny and calling her a whore, which he did, as did Rudy Giuliani, or it's or Letitia James calling her Peekaboo James, which is a terrible play on a racist trope and comment, or comments he's made about Alvin Bragg, like he's subhuman, and so you can just take a baseball bat to him. And I think at the end of the day, when history is written, it's important to recognize that the courage that's been exhibited by these attorney generals, prosecutors, and judges just happen to reside inside of African American and Black Americans. I mean, Fani Willis, there's so much about her that I've always respected. Just a few days ago, she went back in front of yet another historical Black church and defended herself, even though she sort of played with fire a little bit with that on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, when she gave the speech that became a large focus of at least Donald Trump's motion to disqualify her. But you know what? She's part of that community. She's proud to be a part of that community. That community supports her, as do all thinking Americans. She won her primary by an overwhelming amount. It was like 70% to 30%. And I want to acknowledge that. And you've done a very good job, as always, on this podcast and on your own. Not your own. I mean, these are all your own on mistrial, in talking about it from your perspective and talking about the women, particularly, that have come up so strong in bringing Donald Trump to justice.
Yeah, I mean, E. Jean Carroll, for example, is somebody who I give so much credit. Everything that she had to face and she had to deal with, and she came forward, and just the vitriol, both publicly and personally, that she had to face. Yet she had the strength to sit through these trials and face him down despite all of that, or whether it's Letitia James or Fani Willis, or, the judges, Judge Chutkan, just the women who've really had to withstand so much more and so heinous and horrific. I mean, we're going to be talking about Matt Gaetz in a little while, and he's basically accused of having sex with underage girls, and and paying for it. But Donald Trump reveres him. And someone like Fani Willis has a consensual adult relationship with somebody, and somehow, with Nathan Wade, who was a prosecutor in her office, who was a judge and was a high level person. He wasn't necessarily like the power dynamic was very equal there. So just because she was technically his boss, and somehow she is treated like she's some kind of sex crazed maniac, and now that case is in jeopardy because she had a consensual adult relationship. And look at Donald Trump, whether it's sleeping with a porn star and paying her off, and the sexual assaults of people like E. Jean Carroll, and somehow he gets away with it. So just the double standards with women and people of color and everything that just really, when you look at Donald Trump and his cronies and how they all conduct themselves versus the upstanding men and women who are involved in trying to bring him justice, it's just the contrast is just appalling to me. So,
and one that I think you and I are proud to talk about, and I'm proud to have you as my partner, but proud to talk about on this particular episode. We're going to talk about Matt Gaetz and what it means for the hollowing out of MAGA that seems to have no morals and no values, and yet tries to portray itself as the second party in our political system. We just had a major mega church pastor who was a Trump spiritual advisor on more than one occasion stepped down because he had sex with an underage girl. I think she was 12 while he was living in her house when he was not 12, and finally got forced out of the church. But again, this is the type of people that Donald Trump surrounds himself with. And listen, there was a reason my mother used to say, you're judged by the company you keep, birds of a feather. People that are evaluating, and if there are still people out there that are on the fence about the upcoming election, one of the factors or one of the metrics you can use is who is in this person's life? Who has this person chosen to be in his life? Well, every person that Donald Trump has hired that has mattered has either been indicted, lost their bar license, and or has been found in contempt, and or has committed other crimes and other fraud. That's the professional judgment of Donald Trump, right? And everybody around him, and or has committed sex crimes, and he surrounds himself with other misogynists that have committed sex crimes. And this is okay. I posited in a recent hot take. It's one thing to have a presidency turn criminal like Nixon. It's another thing for people who overtly vote for a criminal, convicted felon, and with all these other things that, yes, weren't crimes, but they were darn close to it, like the E. Jean Carroll rape, in terms of the process, the civil fraud, and all of that. And if you're trying to look at the person's body of work, what is this telling you about that person's body of work? The people he considers to be his spiritual advisors who have underage sex, the people who support him in MAGA Congress who have who basically underage sex, who raped a girl. I mean, let's call it for what it is. And people are actually thinking that they're going to vote for him. The good news is it looks like finally, the convictions have seeped into the water table, into the water supply, and now it's showing up in the polling. And now the natural electoral advantage of Joe Biden, for good reason, is coming to the front. And the votes are flipping, like flip in all the major battleground states, where Donald Trump has to hold on to every bit of what he got last time, plus he has to get more. It's the plus he has to get more is the problem for him. Because if the polling is right, it's not always right, but if the polling is right, there's a leakage between 8 and 20% out of the bucket for people who just won't vote for him because he's a convicted felon, including 1 out of 5 independents. And if that holds true, okay, then Biden is reelected. That is obvious. So right at that intersection of law and politics, where we always sit, Karen, me, and Ben, This is where it is coming to fruition. Welcome back. That's a podcast that we started to call Legal AF about 4 years ago, and now you know why. And if you don't know why, join us for the full podcast on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on this YouTube channel for the MeidasTouch Network. We're exclusively there. We curate the top 4 or 5 stories at the intersection of law and politics. We bring it to you just the way we just did. No censorship. We don't blow smoke or sunshine. Karen Freeman Agnifilo and I do it on Wednesdays. Ben Mycelis and me do it on Saturdays. And then we do hot takes like this one about every hour at that same intersection of law and politics. If you know about Legal AF, we really appreciate you being part of our audience. And I wanted to take the time to thank you here. If you take that clip, though, it'll really help us. We don't have a marketing department. Send it off to friends, family, people in your life and say, hey, you should say it like that. Hey, you know that podcast Legal AF I tell you about? Here's a clip. And that little bite-sized Legal AF may actually get them to join our audience. So we appreciate you for doing that. If you don't know what I'm talking about or who I am, I'm Michael Popak. That was Legal AF. And I invite you to join us on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. So until my next hot take, till my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popak reporting. Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know, and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.